Hey, it's Mazzy, and welcome back to It's the Music Stupid number 61. Whenever I get a chance to showcase records of Bob Dylan, I jump all in. I'm a completist of Bob Dylan. He is my favorite uh, solo artist of all time, and I just love the variety of his discography, his songwriting, the sound of his records. He's made just an amazing catalog over since 1962 of music, and he continues to. And I'm in awe of him every time I pull out one of his records and play it. So I picked 5 records because this Friday, the Bob Dylan, the band, the 74 tour, the anniversary of that tour, 50 years ago, comes out on the bootleg series on CD box set, as well as a limited Third Man Vault series sampler. So I picked 5 records. 5 records I'm in the mood in right now. And again, you could pick anything and never go wrong with Bob Dylan. So I'm going to start out with 1967, the end of 67, John Wesley Harding. This was great for a lot of reasons and unique for a lot of reasons. This is where Bob Dylan, again with Bob Johnson, who had done 18 months earlier, Blonde on Blonde, retreats and goes to Nashville studio, Columbia Studios in Nashville, and records this very minimal folky country record, a very lo-fi record with Charlie McCoy on bass, Kenneth Buttrey on drums, and Pete Drake on pedal steel on several tracks. And there's some beautiful songwriting on here. Of course, All on the Watchtower, a year later, would become this massive kind of hit and groundbreaking cover version of a Dylan song, maybe the best cover of any Dylan song by Jimi Hendrix. And then, of course, this gained more notoriety because of that version. It kind of fell through the cracks when this album came out. I remember songs like Drifter Escape, the Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest, Dear Landlord, I'm a Lonesome Hobo, I Pity the Poor Immigrant, and I'll Be Your Baby Tonight. A great selection of songs, very lo-fi. Earlier this year in 67, Columbia released what became this massive hit and really brought in a whole new audience for Bob Dylan with Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits with that infamous Milton Glaser poster in it. Just a beautiful record at a beautiful time. This got, great reviews. Again, it was totally different than what was happening in 1967 when all the bands were going, heavy production, psychedelic. You got the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper, A Magical Mystery Tour, even the Stones jumping on the psychedelic bandwagon, Pink Floyd that year. This was something very different for 1967, almost the opposite of what was happening in pop music at the time. But Dylan, pulls it off and does this amazing, amazing record. This is an original 2i, the way it came out on Columbia in the States. 1967's John Wesley Harding. 1978, Street Legal. This is a record, although it did well, it didn't get a lot of love at the time. And my personal story, I was knee-deep in records all my life from the Beatle days in 64 through 1978. All through the 70s, I've been working in record stores, and I got out of college in late 77, and in the spring and then summer of 78, I backpacked throughout Europe. And I remember it was the first time that I was away from records, away from music. So one day I'm in Amsterdam, and of course in those days, and there were turntables set up, and you can pretty much listen in stores to various records. And I was in a record store in Amsterdam, and the 3 records I listened to on headphones were this record, Bob Dylan's Street Legal, The Promised Land, the Bruce Springsteen, Darkness on the Edge of Town, and Ry Cooder's Jazz that had come out around that same time, because I was going a little cold turkey and not hearing music. We didn't have iPods, we didn't have Discmen, didn't have Walkmans in those days. And so I would just hear records by being in a club, being in a venue, being in a record store, going throughout Europe. And in Amsterdam, I sat and I listened to these 3 records complete. Now, this is considered his big band record. On this tour, I saw him in Rotterdam, and that I think Eric Clapton opened up on that big festival in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. It was the big, giant tour with all the singers and Steve Douglas on sax, which I'm really not a fan of that sax. I would definitely take him off. But this is a record that grew on me in stature over the years. I always loved the opening of Changing in the Guard. It had those background singers, but again, the big production. It had the great, repeating riff with the saxophone and the orchestration in a way, or at least the big band Vegas style orchestration. Is Your Love in Vain, a really beautiful ballad on here. I'll always love that song. Senor, a great record like that. Of course, he hadn't done anything in terms of new music since Desire, 2 years earlier. He had done the Hard Rain Tour. I saw one of those shows in Austin, Texas, and that gave a real punk ethos. He was working on Ronaldo and Claire. He was going through a divorce. This was a tempestuous time for Bob Dylan. I always liked the cover photograph of him. I believe was that in Italy or Spain. I can't remember. I used to know all this. And of course, the Dylan there with the very much, Vegas stylings of a Bob Dylan, very much like what Neil Diamond was doing at the time. Where Are You Tonight? Again, there's a lot of great songs on here. It's a little different style of production on this record, but I'm still a big fan of it. Dedicated to Emmett Grogan. This is 1978's Bob Dylan, Street Legal. A record I think that has grown in stature quite a bit. Let's cut now to 1979. Think of Blood on the Tracks in 74, and then Desire 75. The Ronaldo and Claire and the Hard Rain Tour in 76, 78. He was changing it up every year and a half. And of course, in 1979, this sort of comes out of nowhere. This is when Bob Dylan converts to Christianity, and he made 3 records on, in the Christian vein here. And this is Slow Coming. This is, to me, the best of the 3, although over the years I've grown to enjoy the other 2. At the time, I couldn't stand those, and I went to 3 actually of the shows on this tour, the opening shows at the Warfield Theater when he opened that tour, when he was all in on the Christian sounds and no secular songs initially in that tour, where people were booing, people were walking out, not en masse, but there were 10, 20, 30 people walking out when I saw that very first night Warfield show. But I love this record when it came out. This is a record produced by Jerry Wexler and Barry Becker. It has a fantastic sound to it. Mark Knopfler's on guitar on here. Mark Knopfler's guitar is sublime and really adds to this wonderful sound. Now, I would say, Gotta Serve Somebody and God Gave Name to All the Animals are a little precious, not amongst my favorite songs on here. But there are other songs on here like Precious Angel, I Believe in You, Slow Train, Gonna Change My Way of Thinking, which is more of a rocker, are just wonderful, wonderful songs in the Dylan realm on here. When You Gonna Wake Up as well. And of course, the final track on here, When He Returns, is to me one of the most spectacular piano-based Dylan songs ever. And his vocal on that, it's the best gospel thing Dylan has ever done. I mean, there have been gospel versions of this entire album. It really set a tone, and I think this is a brilliant album. I don't care if someone's, trying to promote their religious beliefs, and we can take it or leave it, and that's what Dylan did here. After 3 albums, he converts back to Judaism, and he bar mitzvahs his son at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem in the Old City. Several years later. This goes from around 79 to 81, 82-ish. But I just think this is a wonderful sounding record, one of his best records around this period. Of course, into the 80s, he had a tempestuous relationship with album and record making, and sometimes some would take on that effect of the 80s sound that has, some of it has been reevaluated over the years. I think the great thing about Dylan is a lot of his music has been reevaluated. But this record actually was a success when it came out, and it continues to be a wonderful record. So I quite like it. 1979, Slow Train, Bob Dylan on Columbia Records. Then a record that is from 2017. Now, this is controversial for another reason. Now, Dylan has had a lot of controversies in terms of fan base. You know, they like to criticize and want him to do less of this and more of this. And the fans, like I said with this recent Beatle video I did, Dylan fans are friggin' crazy. I'm a Dylan fan emotionally, aesthetically, musically, but I don't know every little version of what was left off this album and that album. And I don't know any of that. But Dylan people know that, and they like to kind of use it to tell Dylan what he should be doing, telling Columbia what they should be doing, and telling the people putting out the bootleg series what they should be doing. They know better. So be it. I'm not like that. I'm not one of them. I like what comes out, and then I enjoy it, or I don't. Usually, the odds are I do. Sometimes it takes longer than other times to kind of have it seep in. Now, Dylan in the 20 teens did a series of the so-called Sinatra albums, and they're not all Sinatra, the crooner songs. Now, this is Triplicate. This is the third of a series. He did two prior to this albums where he did the standards, and I think most of these were recorded, as I recall, at the Capitol Studios in Hollywood, especially this one. This, to me, is a beautiful album. This is a 3-record set, so he does a single record and then another single record, and people, the Dylan fans are saying, okay, you got out of system, enough's enough, let's have a new Dylan record. Well, Dylan puts out more records than almost any artist in terms of new music. Sometimes it might take 8 years to a decade or something to put something new out, but he does what he wants when he wants it. So try to second guess him, and I think you're gonna fail every time, because he's full of surprises. He's the Joker, right? He just comes up with something that you don't expect at the time. After doing those 2 single albums, he puts this album Triplicate out. This is the expanded edition with the glossy cover in a folio album. This is how albums were done back in the day. This is literally why they called them albums when 78s came out. This, to me, is a beautiful record. Now, there are those of you who are saying, I hate when he's trying to sing. If I want that, I'll listen to Sinatra or Ella Fitzgerald or, Louis Armstrong or, Sinatra. But these are brilliant. He knows his limitations. He knows what works for him. This is a beautiful, beautiful record. Each of the 3 records sort of emulates a feeling and a theme that Dylan's trying to evoke doing these cover songs. One is called The Sun Goes Down, that has songs like This Nearly Was Me, That Old Feeling, Trade Winds. The next one is called Devil Dolls, with There's a Flow in My Flute, Where's the One, Here's the Rainy Day, but Beautiful, and of course, Coming Home Late, with These Foolish Things, Stranded, Why Was I Born? There's no shortage of pop stars doing cover versions. You can have anyone from going way back to the 1970s with Harry Nilsson's A Touch of Schmeals in the Night. You can have the kind of overbloated, massively hit Rod Stewart doing it, Linda Ronstadt's Nelson Riddle versions. Dylan knew exactly what he wanted on these records. He had a certain limitation, but he knew how to translate that and make it saleable, I guess, or just a wonderful sound. Now, there are Dylan folks that can't stand these records, and I kind of understand that, but there's something really beautiful, and he knows his limitations, and he doesn't go beyond those limitations. Are they right for everyone? Absolutely not. Are they like Sinatra or Ella or Dinah Krall? Absolutely not. But there's certain beauty with his band and what they play and the minimalists of the band. He doesn't overproduce these records. These are produced by Jack Frost, which is his name. He's been using that name to produce all his records almost, the last 20 years or so. He knows the sound he wants. It's in his head. He doesn't overthink it. He doesn't overproduce it. He doesn't over-orchestrate it. These are beautiful records. Lastly, I want to cut to March 2020. What a tempestuous time in the world. Just the seeds of the pandemic. We kept hearing things are happening. And all of a sudden, Dylan drops a song, his longest song to date, called Murder Most Foul. This was dropped as a download, as a streaming song, and as a single. His longest song to date, a litany of lists of things based loosely around the Kennedy assassination, with lists of other artists, of famous people, an ongoing repetitive piece of music. Some people don't see it as a song, more as a piece of poetry, but a timing that really kind of amplified as time went on. Of course, 4 months later, it would be added to Rough and Rowdy Ways. First album he hadn't done in, was it 8 years, I believe, by the time this came out, after Triplicate and those cover records like the one I just showed you of the standard Sinatra-like standards. But this is an amazing record. Now, the Dylan freaks would argue back and forth whether this was meant to be part of the album or it was just an addition thrown on here just to pacify record buyers and everything. I would be convinced it's basically the fourth side of this amazing record, which it is. It's side D on here. It's a part of this record. It's an important part of this record. This is an amazing record. This has mostly his touring band. It lists the touring band that he had, including Charlie Sexton, Bob Britt, Donnie Herron, Tony Garnier, and Matt Chamberlain on drums. But it has other people who weren't listed at the time, like Fiona Apple and Benjamin Trent from the Tom Petty Band on this record. This is a folk record. This is a blues record. This is kind of an intimate record, too. The cover photograph is a vintage photograph that had been colorized from a British photographer showcasing these dancers in Northern England in this bar, this soul funky feel to this. But this is a thick record. This is layered with lyrics that are intense lyrics, or even by Dylan standards. There's so much going on here on this record. And the record initially doesn't have any of the lyrics on here, but it is a beautiful record. Another vintage photograph, colorized photograph of the time, and of course this official portrait of John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in November of 1963. This really kind of set a tone as the pandemic was starting. I remember hearing this and I was just stupefied, and there were chills when I would listen to this over and over again. I had downloaded the song, which I rarely do. I usually wait for an album to come out. I believe I recorded, I think there's a CD single. Now I'm kind of misremembering how I first got this record, but I was all in. I'm all in on Bob Dylan anyway, as I said at the top of this video. But when this record came out, this piece of music, now some say there's no chorus on it, it's just a bunch of listing, and he wrote it down like a laundry list. I think they're missing the point of what Dylan was emulating and trying to say here. But every song on here really just explores this thing that was happening in 2020 and historically. In a way, it's Dylan's own, growing old, his own immortality, or mortality, I should say. This is a fantastic record. Dylan, as I said, Dylan's never made a bad record. There's a certain tone in his voice. Some people don't like the late period Dylan, but I think he has a way to present himself in every period that really just grabs you in a certain way. And this is definitely one of those magical times and intense times. And, is it the best Dylan ever? People like to talk about Like a Rolling Stone and I Want You and Mr. Tambourine Man, or they like Blood in the Tracks and Desire, or Joker Man or something, or the Christian period. There's brilliant aspects to every period of Bob Dylan, and this is definitely one of them. Rough and Rowdy Ways from 2020, from, what is it, June, July of 2020, came at a time during the pandemic, but a wonderful record, a beautiful record, a chilling record by Bob Dylan. Rough and Rowdy Ways 2020. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Mazzy loves you.